I want to talk to you about building a powerful personal brand so people can get known. So a lot of entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, watch our channel, and you've been a significant figure in American politics for decades. I mean, what was the significance for you in terms of Goldwater? Why does he resonate with you so much?
Well, so here's the thing. I grew up outside of New York City in Connecticut, but in a very rural area. So there were no kids my age, for 25 miles. Well, what does that mean? That means no basketball, no baseball, no football, no team sports, but you needed to pursue athletic activities that you could do by yourself. So I started lifting weights. I started doing long distance running, two things you can do by yourself. But there were no kids around my age, so I became a voracious reader.
Wow.
And I read mostly history and biography. But the woman who lived next door to us was a very active Republican. And she gave me a copy of this book, Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater. And I devoured this book, and then I realized after I read it, well, I'm a conservative. In other words, I want small, inobtrusive government. And I want the government to stay out of my private life and out of my business. I want maximum personal freedom. I want a strong national defense, but also as a deterrent to our enemies, as opposed to the neocons who go around the world looking for war. I was a staunch anti-communist. I'm half Italian and I'm half Hungarian. I am Italian from the waist down, but I'd seen what the communists had done in Hungary, the way they had crushed the Hungarian people. So I was an ardent anti-communist. Before I read this book, I wanted to be an actor. My parents said, "You're going to starve to death. Come on. You got to become a plumber, an electrician, a drywall guy, something like that." And then after I read the book, I realized that politics was, show business for ugly people. So I wanted to be in politics. From that moment, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I toyed earlier when I was younger about being a candidate myself, but I don't suffer fools all that gladly. And you have to be able to shake hands with morons and so on. So I'm not good at that. So then I decided that's really not the part I want to be in. I became interested in the management of politics and the idea of how you communicate to the voters to win their votes. I mean, people don't realize that politics, a successful campaign is a very scientific, data-driven campaign. Candidates come to me all the time. They say, "I've got a great chance to win this race." I say, "Okay, great. Show me your benchmark poll." "Oh, we didn't take a poll. I know what the people think." I said, "You know what I call people like that? Losers." That's what I call them, and most of the time they lose. So in the beginning of any campaign, you take a very large sample benchmark poll in which you are very careful not to bias the questions, not to word them in a way to get a desired result, but to word them in a totally neutral way. You can test positive and negative themes, but you do that after you've tested the ballot. Otherwise, you're going to taint the ballot. So if I said, Joe Smith has never paid federal income tax in his entire life, and he beats his wife, and then does that make you more or less likely to vote for Joe Smith? And then in the next question, would you vote for Joe Smith or Sam Brown? Well, I've just cooked my poll, if you see what I'm saying.
Got it.
So we call it order bias, but you avoid order bias. And then in that benchmark poll, you take the opportunity to test everything that you want to know about, what people's priorities are, what views change their opinions, what positions move them to your candidate, move them to your opponent, and so on. And then you're basing all of your advertising decisions on that document, on that initial research. Now, you might go back and re-poll later in the campaign, but what I say to candidates is running a campaign without taking a benchmark poll is like driving a car with your eyes closed.
Wow.
I mean, you will definitely go forward when you hit the gas, but you'll never know what you might hit. Right. So, this is a very data-driven scientific exercise. And then one of the most important things you're going to ask in your poll is, where do you get your information? So the voters, they used to tell you, well, they got most of their information from network television. And then that began to drop off. And then most voters got their information from cable television. We now see that receding. Some voters get their information from radio. That's remained pretty static, and it's also a very good and relatively inexpensive way compared to television and cable to advertise. But of course now, a vast majority of their people getting their news from the internet. Okay, so now you break that down. Okay, you say the internet, but where on the internet? What specific sites on the internet? And that's how you know how to spend your campaign dollars. Now, once you figure that out, and you figure out what your whole budget is, working backwards from election day, you lay out your budget, and you'll know when to begin your paid media. Maybe you only have 3 weeks. Maybe you only have 4 weeks. Maybe you have 6 weeks. But whatever you do has to be sustained. You can't turn a campaign on, then turn it off for the summer and turn it back on. It doesn't work that way. That's really how it's done. I mean, I'm trying to make it as obviously simplistic as possible. I still see, for example, driving in my home state of Florida, from Miami all the way to Jacksonville, I still see Trump billboards, and I scratch my head and say, why in the world would you spend any money on a billboard? I mean, a billboard can only tell you one thing, the candidate's name. Well, Donald Trump already has 98% name ID, right?
Yep.
You might be able to squeeze Make America Great in there, but you can't convince anybody through a billboard. There's no persuasion in a billboard. I don't use them. I don't recommend candidates use them. People love them. They're like yard signs. You know, I did a campaign in Ukraine for a minor pro-Western Democrat party that was seeking to win the minimum number of seats in their unicameral legislature called the Rada. And if your party got 20 seats, you got a seat at the table, right? So, they're behind us technologically. They're not as wired. This was, in the 90s. And I said, look, what we need here are yard signs. They're like, what? I said, yard signs. What are you talking about? I said, you take our candidate's name, we put it on a sign, we put it in people's front yards. Comrade is genius. This is genius. Yard signs. So, I mean, these things that we take for granted that are kind of a staple in American politics, you take them to another country and it's the first time they've ever seen them.
You're right.
Now, look, nobody ever won because they had more yard signs than the other candidate.
Sure.
But if you don't have them, then your volunteers and your supporters, they don't think your campaign's doing well. I know people put all their money into yard signs. You know what happened? They lost.
Losers.
I'm not